You ever notice how the quietest man in the room is the one nobody bothers to listen to? The lobby of Hale Global Systems smelled like polished stone and expensive coffee, the kind that came from machines no one questioned and budgets no one saw. And standing just inside the glass doors, Marcus Reed adjusted the strap of a worn delivery bag against his shoulder. The fabric creased from years of use.
Incredible.
The zipper slightly off track, but still holding, still doing its job, just like him, unnoticed, functional. Easy to overlook, he stepped forward when the receptionist didn't look up. Her fingers moving fast across a screen that reflected numbers he didn't need to understand to recognize pressure. The kind that made people forget how to look at other people, and he waited, not impatient, just still, the way you learn to be when life teaches you that rushing rarely changes anything. Somewhere beyond the security barrier a wall of monitors flickered, lines of translation software running in real time, converting languages into something neat and marketable, but something in. The rhythm felt off, not broken, just wrong, like a sentence that sounded right until you listened closely. Marcus tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second, then looking away. Because it wasn't his place, it never was. You can leave it there, the receptionist said without lifting her gaze, her voice smooth, practiced, not unkind but not warm either, just efficient, and Marcus nodded once, setting the bag down carefully as if even that small act deserved attention. But his eyes drifted back to the screen, just for a moment. Just long enough for the thought to slip out before he could stop it. That translation loop's stacking wrong, he said quietly, almost to himself, the words barely louder than the hum of the machines.
Incredible.
But in a room built on control, even a whisper had weight. The typing stopped, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had pulled a plug, and the air shifted, subtle but real. Marcus felt it before he saw it, the way people suddenly became aware of him. Not as a person, but as a disruption. The receptionist finally looked up, her expression tightening just enough to signal a boundary had been crossed. "Excuse me?" she asked, and Marcus straightened slightly, already regretting the sound of his own voice. "Nothing," he said, calm, respectful, stepping back half an inch as if to return himself to the background where he belonged. But it was too late. Because somewhere behind the glass, heels clicked against marble, slow, deliberate, each step measured like a decision already made. And when she appeared, Victoria Hale didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Her presence carried its own gravity, tailored suit, posture sharp, eyes that didn't search. They assessed. She looked at Marcus the way people look at a file they haven't decided is important yet, and for a brief second either of them spoke. The room holding its breath in that quiet space between assumption and truth. "You noticed something about our system?" she asked, her tone even, not mocking, not welcoming, just precise, like a question with no room for error. Marcus met her gaze for a moment, then glanced away, not out of fear, but out of habit, the kind that keeps things simple. "Just looked like the indexing was off," he said, voice steady, no attempt to impress, no attempt to retreat. Just a statement placed gently into the room, and for the first time, something in Victoria's expression paused, not softened, not changed, just paused, as if the moment didn't quite fit the pattern she was used to seeing, and in that pause, something small but undeniable began to shift. The room did not erupt the way people expect when something unusual happens, it tightened instead, like a string pulled just a little too far, and somewhere near the back a quiet laugh slipped out. Not loud enough to challenge the moment, but just enough to remind everyone where Marcus stood in the hierarchy, a delivery man with a suggestion, nothing more. Victoria did not turn toward the sound. Her eyes stayed on him, measuring. Not impressed, not dismissive, just calculating. Indexing is handled by a team of engineers who are paid very well to get it right, she said, her voice calm, almost conversational, but the weight behind it pressed down on the space between them. "So help me understand why you think you see something they missed." Marcus shifted his weight slightly, not defensive, just grounded, his hands relaxed at his sides. "I do not think I see something they missed," he replied, choosing each word carefully. "I just noticed a pattern that looked inefficient." The word inefficient lingered in the air longer than it should have, like it had wandered into a place where it did not belong. A few employees exchanged glances, subtle, quick, the kind that carried judgment without needing to speak it out loud. Victoria took a step closer, not enough to invade his space, but enough to make the distance intentional. "And you are basing that on what exactly?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Not curiosity, something sharper. Your experience delivering lunch orders." A few more smiles surfaced, controlled, professional, but unmistakably there. Marcus did not react to them, not outwardly. He had heard worse in quieter places. "No," he said simply, and for a brief second, that single word disrupted the rhythm of the room more than any long explanation could have. Victoria's gaze narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "No," she repeated, and there was the faintest trace of something new in her tone now, not mockery, not yet, but something that leaned in that direction. Marcus nodded once. "I have seen similar structures before," he said, not elaborating, not offering credentials, just placing the statement there and letting it stand on its own. The silence that followed stretched, not empty, but charged, like something was about to be decided. Victoria glanced briefly toward the wall of screens, then back at him, and when she spoke again, there was a shift, small, but deliberate. "You understand Mandarin?" she said, not asking. Stating, as if testing the edges of his claim from a different angle, Marcus hesitated for less than a second, then answered. "Yes, ma'am." The room stilled again, the earlier amusement now replaced with something closer to curiosity. But not respect, not yet. Victoria's lips pressed together in a line that almost resembled a smile but did not quite reach that point. "That is convenient," she said, her voice smooth, controlled, and now unmistakably edged with challenge. She turned slightly, gesturing toward one of the large displays where a block of Chinese text scrolled rapidly through a translation interface. "Because that system you are critiquing is currently processing live Mandarin input." She paused, letting that detail settle, then looked back at him, her eyes steady, unwavering. "So here is what we are going to do." The room leaned in without moving, every sound pulling inward, every distraction fading out. "You are going to show me," she said, and the words did not land like a request, they landed like a line drawn in the floor. Marcus felt it, not as pressure, but as clarity, the kind that comes when there is no more space to remain unnoticed, and for the first time since he walked into the building, he did not look away first. Marcus did not move right away, not because he was unsure, but because he understood what the moment was asking of him. Not proof, not performance, but exposure, the kind that stays with you long after the room forgets your name. The screen continued to scroll lines of Mandarin characters, clean, fast, confident, and yet just slightly off in a way most people would never notice. Victoria stepped aside just enough to clear the path to a terminal near the glass wall, the gesture simple, but final. "You have a few minutes," she said, and even though she did not raise her voice, the room adjusted around her words. Conversation stopped, footsteps slowed, even the quiet hum of the system felt sharper now. Marcus glanced once at the terminal, then at the screen, then back at Victoria, not challenging, not asking for permission, just acknowledging the line that had been drawn. He set his delivery bag gently on the floor beside the console, careful, deliberate, as if even that small action deserved respect. His hands hovered over the keyboard for a brief second, not trembling, not rushing, just still, the way they had been trained to wait until the mind was ready. Somewhere behind him a phone camera lifted, then another, small black rectangles rising like silent witnesses. Marcus did not turn, he did not react. He had learned a long time ago that attention was not something you chase, it was something you survived. He leaned slightly closer to the screen, eyes scanning the structure, not just the words, but the rhythm beneath them, the way the system looped back on itself, the way certain phrases lost their meaning as they passed through layers of logic that were built for speed, not understanding. "Your system is translating correctly," he said quietly, more to the code than to the room. "But it is not listening." The sentence slipped out without explanation, and for a moment no one responded because no one was sure how to respond. Victoria's expression did not change, but her focus sharpened. "Then make it listen," she said, and this time there was no trace of humor, no edge of mockery, just a direct command. Marcus nodded once, almost imperceptible, and then his fingers began to move, not fast, not dramatic, just steady, precise, each keystroke placed with intention. The code on the screen shifted, lines adjusted, parameters restructured, nothing flashy, nothing that would impress someone who did not understand what they were seeing. But the rhythm changed. Subtle at first, then clearer, like a sentence being rewritten so it could finally breathe. Someone behind him whispered something under their breath. Another person leaned closer, trying to follow what he was doing. But Marcus did not look up. He stayed with the work.
It's instantaneous.
Because that was the only place he had ever been taken seriously. The system processed a new input, Mandarin text flowing through the updated structure. And this time when the English output appeared, it did not just match the words, it carried the meaning, the tone, the intention behind them. The difference was small to the untrained eye, but unmistakable to anyone who had ever listened closely. The room went quiet again, not the earlier kind of quiet filled with judgment, but something heavier, something that did not know where to settle. Marcus lifted his hands from the keyboard, not dramatically, just done. "Try a live input," he said, stepping back half a step to give the space back to them, not claiming anything, not holding on to the moment, just returning it. Victoria did not move immediately. Her eyes remained on the screen, reading, processing, and for the first time since he walked in, she was not looking at him as a category, she was looking at the result. The system accepted the new input without hesitation, Mandarin characters streaming across the screen in real time. But this time the output did not flatten into something generic, it carried weight, tone, intention, the kind of meaning that did not translate easily unless someone understood more than just vocabulary. A subtle shift, but enough that the engineers in the room leaned forward without realizing it. One of them reached for a keyboard at a nearby station, running a secondary test.
It's instantaneous.
Faster this time,
the
pushing the system
flawless.
harder, more
Phase
complex
1 complete.
phrasing,
We're
idioms, layered expressions that usually
Incredible.
confuse the model. The result came back clean, not perfect, but aware. And that was new, that was different. Marcus stood quietly beside the terminal, not watching for approval, not scanning faces, just waiting the way he always did when a job was finished, the way you wait when you are used to moving on before anyone decides if you mattered. Victoria finally stepped closer to the screen, her heels soft against the floor. Her reflection faint in the glass as lines of translated text continued to appear. She read them once, then again, slower the second time. As if looking for the flaw that should have been there, but was not. Behind her someone cleared their throat, unsure if they should speak, unsure if this was still her moment or his. She did not turn. "Run a comparative load," she said, her voice steady, controlled, the command immediate. The engineers moved quickly now, no hesitation, no quiet laughter, just focus. Multiple inputs fed into the system at once, different dialects, varied sentence structures, edge cases designed to break weaker models. The outputs appeared almost instantly, consistent, stable, carrying nuance instead of just accuracy. A low murmur spread through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but real. Something had changed and everyone felt it at the same time. Marcus shifted his gaze slightly
Phase 1
toward the
complete.
screen,
We're
not
live.
checking his work, just observing
Incredible.
the flow, making sure it held, because that was what mattered, not the moment, not the reaction. The system either worked, or it did not. Victoria exhaled slowly, not dramatic, just enough to release the tension she had not acknowledged until now. Then she turned, finally looking directly at him again. But this time the distance in her eyes had narrowed, not gone, but different, recalibrated. "What exactly did you change?" she asked, and the question carried something new, not challenge, not doubt, something closer to respect but not fully formed yet. Marcus met her gaze for a second, then answered simply. "I stopped it from trying to translate everything the same way," he said, his voice calm even. "Languages are not built to be processed like spreadsheets." A few heads nodded without thinking, recognizing the truth in the statement even if they would not have said it out loud. Victoria studied him, not searching for credentials now, but for understanding. "And you just knew that," she said, the pause in the middle of her sentence revealing more than the words themselves. Marcus gave a small nod. "I have listened to people long enough," he replied, and that was all. No list of achievements, no explanation of where or how, just a quiet truth placed in the room, the kind that did not need decoration. The silence that followed was no longer uncomfortable, it was reflective, the kind that forces people to reconsider what they thought they understood. One of the engineers stepped closer to Victoria, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the urgency. "We should integrate this into the main pipeline," he said, and she did not respond immediately, her eyes still on Marcus, measuring something that could not be quantified on a screen. The system continued to run behind them, stable, efficient, quietly proving a point that no one had expected to be made by someone like him, and for the first time since he walked in, Marcus was not invisible, but he did not step into that visibility, he simply stood there. The same way he always had. Steady, present, and ready to leave the moment the door opened again. No one clapped, and that was the first sign that something real had happened, because applause would have made it easy, would have reduced the moment to entertainment. But this was not that, this was a recalibration, quiet and uncomfortable, the kind that lingers long after the room clears. Marcus reached down and picked up his delivery bag, not in a hurry, not trying to escape, just following the rhythm he knew, finish the task. Move on, do not stay where you are not expected to belong. The zipper caught for a second before closing, a small, ordinary detail in a room that suddenly felt anything but ordinary. Behind him the engineers were already speaking in lower tones, faster now, their language shifting from dismissal to integration, phrases like deployment and scalability replacing the earlier silence. But none of it was directed at him, not yet. Victoria watched him as he adjusted the strap over his shoulder, her expression no longer distant, but not fully open either. Something in between, something learning. "You did not answer my question," she said, her voice steady, but quieter than before, not for the room, but for him. Marcus paused, just long enough to acknowledge her words, then turned slightly, not fully facing her, not fully leaving. "Which part?" he asked, and there was no defiance in it, just clarity, the kind that does not assume importance. Victoria held his gaze. "Where you learned that," she said, and for a moment the room faded again, not physically, but in relevance, because the question was no longer about the system. Marcus glanced toward the screen one last time, the translation still running smoothly, then back at her. "Libraries," he said, simple, unembellished. "Borrowed books, online forums, whatever I could find. After work." He shifted his weight slightly, not uncomfortable, just grounded in the truth of it. "Late nights mostly," he added, and something in the way he said it carried more than the words themselves, the kind of time that does not show up on resumes, the kind that costs more than it gives back. Victoria studied him, not interrupting, not filling the silence, because for the first time she did not need to control it. "And you just kept going," she said, almost to herself. Marcus gave a small nod. "I had a reason to," he replied, and that was all, no explanation. No story offered up for sympathy, just a boundary set with quiet precision, the kind that says enough without inviting more. A notification chimed softly from Victoria's phone, then another, the world outside the moment pulling at her attention the way it always did, but she did not reach for it, she did not break eye contact, not yet. "You realize what you just did," she said, and this time there was no edge, no test. Just acknowledgement. Marcus adjusted the strap on his shoulder again. A familiar gesture, grounding. "I fixed something that needed fixing," he answered, and the simplicity of it landed heavier than any attempt at recognition could have. A few of the engineers nearby fell silent again, hearing the difference between contribution and ego, between doing something and claiming it. Victoria exhaled slowly, her posture shifting just enough to signal a decision forming. "We could use someone like you here," she said, and even though the words were measured, they carried weight, the kind that changes trajectories. Marcus did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because he understood what offers like that often required in return: time, presence, a version of yourself that did not always belong to you anymore. He looked at her, really looked this time, not at the title, not at the power, but at the person behind it. "I already have a job," he said, calm, respectful, and there was no apology in it, no attempt to soften the truth, just a statement placed where it needed to be. The room shifted again, not in disbelief, but in realization. because declining something like that was not expected, not from someone in his position, not in a place like this. Victoria did not react the way the room expected her to. She did not push, did not persuade, she just nodded once, slowly, as if filing the moment away somewhere deeper than business, somewhere personal, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them, not agreement, not understanding, but recognition, the kind that does not need to be named to be real. Marcus gave a small, polite nod in return, then turned toward the exit, not rushing, not lingering, just moving forward the way he always had, steady, quiet, and unchanged by the fact that for a moment, the room had finally seen him. The glass doors closed behind Marcus with a soft click that barely registered against the quiet hum of the building, but to him it felt like a return, not a loss. The city outside greeted him the way it always did, with motion that did not wait and noise that did not care.
Incredible.
Taxis sliding past, people moving with purpose, conversations blending into a rhythm that had nothing to do with boardrooms or billion-dollar systems. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder again as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight familiar, grounding, a reminder of what his day actually looked like, not moments of recognition, but hours of consistency. Inside, several floors above, the room he left behind had not returned to normal, not fully. Victoria remained where she stood for a few seconds longer than necessary, her phone vibrating again in her hand, a meeting reminder, then another, urgent, layered, demanding. But she did not answer them right away. Her eyes shifted back to the screen, the system still running with that quiet, stable rhythm, something improved without ceremony, without announcement, and that unsettled her more than failure ever had, because failure she could control, she could fix, she could command her way through it. But this had arrived without permission, without structure, carried in by someone who did not belong in any of her frameworks. "Run a full integration test," she said finally, her voice regaining its usual clarity, and the room responded instantly, movement returning, commands being executed. But there was a difference now, a subtle one, the kind that does not show in reports. The engineers worked with a sharper focus, not just because the system had changed, but because their understanding of who could change it had shifted. Victoria turned away from the screen and walked toward her office, each step measured, but slower than before, as if she was carrying something she had not planned for. Inside the elevator, the mirrored walls reflected her image back at her, composed, precise, unchanged on the surface. But her eyes lingered for a fraction longer than usual, not on herself, but on the space behind her where he had stood. "Libraries," she repeated under her breath, the word unfamiliar in her world of private consultants and proprietary data, and yet it stayed with her, simple, accessible, human. Back on the street, Marcus checked the time on his phone, calculating distance the way he always did, not in miles, but in minutes. He had another delivery across town, a school pickup window he never missed, a routine that did not adjust itself around unexpected moments. He reached his truck, the paint slightly faded, the interior clean but worn. A child's backpack resting on the passenger seat, small, blue, with a zipper pull shaped like a rocket. He paused for a second before getting in, not reflecting, not replaying what had just happened, just breathing, letting the moment settle into the same place all his other days lived, steady, unannounced. He started the engine, the low rumble filling the cabin, and merged back into traffic without hesitation. No dramatic glance back, no need to hold on to what the building represented, because to him it was just another stop. Another place where something needed to be fixed and then left behind. Back upstairs, Victoria stepped into her office, the skyline stretching out beyond the glass, the city she had learned to master laid out in grids and patterns she understood. But something about the morning did not fit those patterns anymore. She placed her phone on the desk without looking at the notifications, then opened a new window on her computer. Not financial reports, not projections, something simpler. Employee access logs. She typed a name she had only heard once, slowly, as if confirming it was real. Marcus Reed. The system searched, paused, and returned almost nothing. No employee file, no credentials, no history within her company, just a visitor entry, time-stamped, temporary, and already fading from the system. Victoria leaned back slightly, her fingers resting on the edge of the desk, not frustrated, not confused, but aware of something she could not quantify. "Find him," she said. Quietly, not to anyone in particular, but the words carried the same weight as any formal order, because for the first time in a long time, this was not about control, it was about understanding, and that was something she was no longer sure she had.
It's instantaneous.
The afternoon light stretched across the windshield as Marcus pulled into the school parking lot, the kind of place where time moved differently, slower, measured not by deadlines but by bells and small footsteps. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, not checking his phone, not replaying the morning, just listening to the quiet inside the truck, the faint ticking of the cooling engine. The distant laughter of children filtering through the air. This was the part of his day that did not negotiate, the part that stayed the same no matter what the world outside decided he was worth. The doors of the school opened and a wave of motion followed, backpacks bouncing, voices overlapping, energy unfiltered and honest. Marcus stepped out of the truck and leaned lightly against the door, his eyes scanning the crowd not with urgency but with certainty. He knew exactly who he was looking for. A small figure broke through the flow. Blue backpack slightly crooked, sneakers flashing with each step. "Dad!" the boy called out, his voice cutting through everything else without effort. Marcus's expression shifted, not dramatically, just enough to soften the edges that the day had placed there. He straightened as the boy reached him, dropping the backpack into Marcus's hand before wrapping his arms around his waist, quick, natural, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Marcus rested a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, steady, present. "How was school?" he asked, his
instantaneous.
voice lower now, warmer. The boy pulled back just enough to look up at him, eyes bright with something he had been holding onto all day. "We learned about space again," he said, words coming fast, excited. "Did you know there are stars bigger than the sun, like way bigger?" Marcus nodded, listening fully, not interrupting, not correcting, just giving the moment space to exist. "I believe it," he said, and the boy grinned, satisfied, as if belief was all that mattered. They walked back to the truck together, the boy climbing into the passenger seat, adjusting the straps of his backpack with focused determination. Marcus closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side, the routine familiar, grounding. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot, merging into the slow afternoon traffic. "Did you fix things today?" the boy asked after a moment, his voice curious, not expecting anything specific. Marcus glanced at him briefly, then back at the road. "Something like that," he replied, and that was enough. The boy nodded as if that answer carried everything he needed, leaning back into the seat. Already shifting his attention to the world outside the window, buildings passing, clouds drifting, the kind of details that adults forget to notice. Marcus drove in silence for a while, not the empty kind, but the kind filled with presence, the kind that does not need to be filled with words. Back in her office, Victoria stood by the window, the city stretching endlessly in front of her, but her focus was somewhere else. Her assistant stood near the door, tablet in hand, waiting. "We found a delivery record," the assistant said, her tone professional, precise. "Name matches, part-time courier, no advanced education listed, no technical background." Victoria did not turn immediately, her eyes still on the skyline. "And yet," she said quietly, almost to herself. The assistant hesitated, unsure if a response was expected. "Do you want us to reach out?" she asked finally. Victoria turned then, slowly, her expression composed but thoughtful. "No," she said after a brief pause, and the answer surprised even her. "Not yet," she added, her voice softer now, not indecisive, but deliberate, because something about the way he had walked away made her understand that this was not a problem to be solved or a resource to be acquired. It was something else entirely, something that required more than authority to approach, and for the first time in a long time, she was willing to wait. The evening settled in slowly, not with a sudden drop in noise, but with a soft dimming of everything that had demanded attention all day. Marcus's apartment carried the quiet of a place lived in with care, not excess, the faint scent of laundry detergent lingering in the air, a small lamp casting warm light across a worn but clean table where a stack of library books sat neatly aligned. The boy's backpack rested nearby, unzipped now, its contents spilling into the space between school and home. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter, pouring 2 glasses of water, simple, steady movements that did not require thought. "Homework first or dinner?" he asked without turning, his voice calm, familiar, the kind that did not rush answers. "Homework," the boy replied, already flipping open a workbook, pencil tapping lightly against the page as if testing where to begin. Marcus set the glass beside him, then took a seat across the table, not to supervise, not to correct, just to be there, present. In the same way he had been all day, but now without the weight of being observed. The boy frowned slightly at a problem, numbers arranged in a way that asked for more than memorization. "I do not get this one," he said, sliding the page forward. Marcus leaned in, his eyes scanning the question, not rushing to answer, just understanding the shape of it. "What do you think it is asking?" he said, not giving the solution, but opening the space for the boy to find it. The boy hesitated, then tried. Explaining his thought in pieces, some right, some not. Marcus nodded as he listened, adjusting gently where needed, not correcting the mistake, but guiding the path around it. The pencil moved again, slower this time, more certain, until the answer settled into place.
Phase 1 complete.
"Oh,"
We're live.
the boy said quietly, the realization small but complete. Marcus gave a slight smile, not proud, not surprised, just acknowledging the moment. Because learning was not something you forced, it was something you allowed. Silence followed, comfortable, steady, broken only by the soft scratch of pencil against paper. On the other side of the city, Victoria sat alone at her desk, the building around her quieter now, most of the lights dimmed, the urgency of the day replaced by a different kind of stillness. Her laptop remained open, but untouched, the screen displaying data she had not read, her mind elsewhere. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it back down, not because there was nothing to do, but because for the first time, doing more did not feel like the answer. Her eyes drifted to the reflection in the glass, not the skyline, but her own silhouette against it, composed, controlled, and yet slightly out of alignment with something she could not define. "He listened," she said quietly, the words barely forming, not about the system, but about the way he had moved through the room, the way he had not needed to raise his voice to be heard. Back at the table, Marcus closed one of the books and reached for another, flipping it open to a page filled with unfamiliar characters. The boy looked up, curious. "What is that?" he asked, leaning closer. Marcus turned the book slightly so they could both see. "Another language," he said simply. The boy's eyes widened, not intimidated, but interested. "Can you read it?" he asked. Marcus nodded once, then traced a line of text with his finger, reading it aloud slowly, not performing, just sharing, the sounds unfamiliar but steady. The boy listened, not understanding the words, but recognizing something in the tone, something calm, something patient. "Will you teach me?" he asked after a moment. Marcus looked at him, really looked, and for a second the weight of everything else fell away, replaced by something clearer, something that did not need to be earned or proven. "Yeah," he said, quiet, certain. "I will." And in that simple exchange, something lasting took shape, not in a boardroom, not on a screen, but in a small room filled with light that did not need to impress anyone to matter. Morning arrived without ceremony, the kind that did not announce itself but simply replaced the dark with something softer. Marcus stood by the small kitchen window, a cup of black coffee in his hand, steam rising slowly into the quiet air. The apartment still carried the calm of the night before, his son asleep in the next room, the world outside just beginning to move. He did not rush, did not check messages, did not look for anything beyond what was already there, because his days were not built on anticipation, they were built on presence. He took a sip of the coffee.
We're live.
Bitter, familiar, grounding, and set the cup down gently on the counter, the same way he always did, nothing wasted, nothing exaggerated. Across the city, Victoria stood in her office again, but the space felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because something in her had. The screen still displayed numbers, projections, performance metrics, all the things that had once defined clarity for her. But this morning they felt incomplete, not wrong, just insufficient. She walked to the window, the skyline stretching out as it always had, but her focus did not stay there long. Instead, Her mind returned to a quiet voice in a room that had not needed to be loud to be heard. She turned back to her desk and opened a new document, not a report, not a directive, something simpler, a note, the cursor blinking as if waiting for her to decide what mattered enough to be written down. She hesitated. Then typed a single line, not for the company, not for anyone else, but for herself, a reminder that something real had crossed her path and she had almost missed it. Back in the apartment, Marcus moved through his routine with the same steady rhythm, preparing breakfast, simple, balanced, nothing elaborate, just enough. His son appeared in the doorway, hair slightly out of place, eyes still adjusting to the light. "Are we learning more today?" He asked, voice soft but hopeful. Marcus glanced at him and gave a small nod.
Incredible.
"Every day," he said, and the answer landed exactly where it needed to, not as a promise, but as a way of life. The boy smiled, satisfied, taking his seat at the table, the morning unfolding without urgency, without pressure, just time shared, the kind that builds something invisible but lasting. Later, as Marcus stepped outside, locking the door behind him, the air carried that early day clarity, cool, open, full of possibility that did not demand recognition to exist. He walked to his truck, the same worn vehicle, the same steady engine. Nothing about it had changed, and neither had he, not in the way the world measures change, but something deeper remained intact, something that did not bend when it was overlooked or dismissed, something that did not need validation to continue. Across the city, Victoria closed her laptop, the note saved, not as a strategy, not as a decision, but as a shift, subtle, quiet, but real. She reached for her phone, then paused, placing it back down again, choosing, for once, not to fill the space with action, but to let the understanding settle, because not everything valuable needed to be acquired, some things needed to be respected from a distance. Marcus started his engine and pulled into the street, merging into the flow of the day ahead. No audience, no recognition,
the translation is
just
flawless.
movement, steady and intentional, and somewhere between the silence he carried and the lives he touched without asking for anything in return, something undeniable remained, not loud, not visible, but lasting. He did not change the room by raising his voice, he changed it by refusing to be smaller than who he already was.